get started. Good morning, everybody. My name is Tushar Chikalekar, and I head up the economic development team at Nexsen Pruet. With me today, I'm proud to say, is that's co-hosting this webinar is friend and business associate Sam Konduras. Sam, I'm sure most of you know Sam. Sam has done an amazing job leading SC Bio over the last 4 years. Has had a storied career in economic development, having spent some time at the Department of Commerce, as well as, I believe, the Upstate Alliance. Has spent time in sort of the healthcare ecosystem of GHS, and brought all of those tools and more to his time at SC Bio. And of course, he has an amazing team that includes Aaron Ford, Morgan Nichols, Sam Patrick, Zach Hargett, and so many others. So what we want to talk about today is a really important issue for really the entire U.S., but certainly one for South Carolina, and one that I think what you'll see is South Carolina could be well positioned to take advantage of, and that is onshoring of the life sciences industry. And Sam really, and Sam, if you would, you really bring some unique, I guess, perspective to this. There is as many probably know, there is a career change coming up for you. Maybe not a career change is not the right word, but you'll still be in our world, but not at SC Bio.
Right.
So yeah, you want to touch on that a little bit?
Sure. First off, excited to be here with you this morning, Tushar. Appreciate all the support and expertise you bring to SC Bio as vice chairman of our board of directors on the executive committee, and it's always a pleasure. Legitimately, we tease each other a lot, and we have a great time ribbing one another. But I have no more respect for fellow attorney and your prowess in the economic development arena in South Carolina. So yeah, it's one of those unexpected opportunities. Sometimes God sends you the double reverse hook shot that you weren't really looking for, and that did come in the form of an opportunity with one of the founding partners, actually, of SC Bio, in a new private sector corporate leadership role. If we have a chance, I can talk a little bit more about that later. So this is my final week during a 1-month transition from SC Bio into that. Maybe it gives me an opportunity this morning to, give sort of a little bit unique perspectives, a bit of an exit interview of really even our strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats as it relates to onshoring and the growth of the life science industry in the state. But thanks for having me, man.
Absolutely, Sam, and thanks for being here. I think when I reached out to you to do this webinar with us, I don't think that career change was in process at that time, certainly. So appreciate your willingness to do it in the perspective that you bring. So again, just to frame our conversation today, we've got a challenge, and it's one that I think all of us in the life sciences world, in the economic development world, and in all the related industries, are hoping. My hope is that we're going to take it head on, and that is trying to bring as much production of life science materials, products, pharmaceuticals back to the U.S. and specifically back to South Carolina. What we've seen over recent years, and we'll touch more on this, is that manufacturing of these products has moved overseas precipitously over the last 30 to 40 years. And while that's been happening, our consumption in the U.S. of those products has been growing. So there's been an inverse relationship, and in this particular area, you don't want an inverse relationship. And of course, many of us that work in this space have known about this, but certainly I think everybody in the entire country that's followed the COVID-19 pandemic has certainly either read, heard, or felt the impacts of this particular issue as we try and continue to operate our country in a healthy and productive way. But before we talk about that specific issue, wanted to ask Sam to give us a little bit of input on where we are currently in the life sciences industry in South Carolina.
Yeah, will do. Thanks, Tushar. And so it's such an interesting time. You couldn't have made up the last 2 years if you tried. Hollywood couldn't have pulled off everything that we've been through together with COVID-19. And regardless of the catastrophic effects it has had in many sectors and on many people's lives, which we lament, there are real silver linings. And what it did do is it thrust the life sciences industry into the forefront like never before, probably created a level of public awareness of life sciences that is unprecedented, as really, along with our healthcare heroes, the industry that had to help create a pathway to navigate us out of this extraordinary crisis that we're still dealing with. And this one is going to echo for many years to come, as we know. But I think a lot of people, frankly, in South Carolina, understandably, didn't really have a very clear idea about the life science industry, what existed in the state, what its impact could be during an event like what we've been through. So just to give maybe Tushar some context to, I think, some of the key elements as you dig into onshoring and the mechanics and the tools and opportunity zones, while that matters, here's a quick snapshot of the industry. And this first screen, many of you in South Carolina will recognize it probably. It's a spectacular photo of Nephron Pharmaceuticals, which now employs over 2,000 citizens in Lexington County, just outside of Columbia. It's an amazing 50-acre campus, and I like to start with it because it is kind of representative of a new face of the life science industry that is unexpected for many people in South Carolina and around the country. We have actually quite a story building, and it's been fun for me in the last 4 years to dispel myths and surprise people with the energy and momentum of the industry here. To use it as just an example and how relevant they have been and continue to be during COVID. They produce billions of doses of respiratory therapies for inflammatory lung diseases across the board, which became a very important treatment protocol during COVID, one of the first line therapies used. So it created explosive growth with their business, doubling it, in fact. And, to keep an operation like this wide open to serve the public, they had to take extraordinary measures, where they did their own COVID-19 PCR testing on site, antibody testing on site, had to set up daycare centers, et cetera. And they really created kind of a gold standard of how a major manufacturing operation could stay in business, even at the height of a pandemic. They are also the largest producer of nebulizers in the world. So more on that kind of story, how they sit in an opportunity zone, how they are working with a lot of other companies that may join them here in South Carolina. The economic impact study, Tushar, we did 4 years ago. So these are all old numbers, which is what is really interesting. We know they're all a lot larger now, and a new study will be embarked on. But it was almost a pleasant shock from everyone from the governor to the commerce secretary to find out that in a state that is so well known for building some of the best cars and planes in the world, that the fastest growing industry segment is life sciences. In fact, recently in a follow-up study with Joey Von Nessen with the Darla Moore School, we knew it was the fastest growing, what we call our innovation economy. But what we learned is in real numbers, it is actually the fastest growing industry in the state. Part of that is because we do have a more mature cluster in automotive and aerospace, and there is a lot of upside opportunity for life sciences. There is a life science firm, at least one, in 42 out of 46 counties. That surprises a lot of people. It also conveys the width and the breadth and the depth of this industry. And I'm going to talk in a moment just about what those segments are to give you a clear picture of what do we mean when we say life sciences. 4 years ago, we knew this industry was already generating a economic impact north of $12 billion a year for the state, anchored by about 43,000 direct employees, earning salaries and wages about double the state average. It is also an industry that has triple the research and development spend of all other industries, including automotive and aerospace. So it makes it a heck of a fast ride to a knowledge economy and a great diversification of our economy. It really demonstrated when automotive, unfortunately, more because of global supply disruption issues during the pandemic, was down at one point in the spring of last year of about 40%. Aerospace was down about 70%, while this industry was up. So it kind of demonstrated, because it is so interwoven with the healthcare industry, a lot of recession resistance. And I think the next screen might be the most exciting one. This one actually gets a lot of our legislators' attention, and that's a good thing. It's one thing to talk about it. I'm a visual learner, so when I see a map like this that depicts over 700 life science firms in the state of South Carolina, it really makes an impression. And while you do see very dense clustering of the industry around areas like Greenville, Spartanburg, Charleston, the Columbia area. You look at a county like Greenwood, loaded with life science companies, and again, 42 out of 46. I'm going to talk in a moment about the various segments that comprise this very well-distributed industry. So this next screen, I think this one just helps bring it home for people. Life sciences as a term is kind of like advanced materials. It covers a lot of ground. And one of the issues we had in South Carolina was just to understand all these pieces, integrate it, channel it to really create a story that the world didn't know. Most of our own citizens still don't know, but it's big. So starting top left, biotech, drugs, pharmaceuticals. Think about all the vaccines that have been under development in record time. Think of those billions of respiratory doses that I've been talking about with a company like Nephron. That's all in that arena that's around live organisms, molecules, compounds, et cetera. And then you move to medtech to the right of that. So think of every medical device known to man, from a brain implant to a new knee replacement to, frankly, an innovative Band-Aid. And in fact, a lot of the PPE that we'll even discuss, face shields, et cetera, those would go under the medtech, medical device and equipment category. Next is digital health, you see to the right. So digital health used to be kind of a subset of medtech. It is now the fastest growing segment of the life science industry, just an avalanche of every software, app, wearable, sensors that you can imagine, and AI and digital health are transforming healthcare like never before. So it has clearly exploded into its own category, and South Carolina has a very good foothold there as well. Below that, research, testing, and medical labs. So again, went into the forefront like crazy during COVID, where suddenly every company that had COVID PCR test kits, had antibody testing, antigen testing, et cetera, all falling under these diagnostics, testing, medical labs. And in fact, Vicor Scientific, who I'm joining forces with, is a major force in this area. And on the other end of the spectrum, you have like a Greenwood Genetics Center, which is one of our top flight research labs really in the world for what they do. And then another segment that was highlighted extraordinarily during COVID was Bioscience Distribution. Sounds kind of mundane when you just think about distribution and packaging, but the fact is, every drug we all take, we got to count on it being efficacious and working. We have to trust it. Drugs shipped all over the country, all over the world, have to be temperature controlled, monitored. So this involves a variety of advanced materials and other things that are unique to the industry. The facility you see in that photo is Softbox Systems in Greenville, South Carolina. That was the largest pharmaceutical packaging company in Europe, chose Greenville as their Western Hemisphere headquarters. Every Pfizer produced COVID vaccine shipped across the United States was in packaging that is still being produced and shipped out of Greenville, South Carolina every day. And then BioAg is a huge arena. I think, Tushar, even a project you were really involved with, Opportunity Zone, fuel project down in Hampton County, is a good example of really amazing opportunities that this state, with all of its natural resources, has to be a big player. So hopefully this just gives everybody some context as we get into the discussion now. And I'm going to say, while each of these categories could come into play, clearly that drugs and pharmaceutical, biotech, were also API, active pharmaceutical ingredients. This is the shock that we all learned, that 95% of every drug we take, every bit of API that's used for every drug known to man, is produced offshore, primarily China, India. It is a national vulnerability and a security issue that Tushar is going to talk about. And it is why there is unprecedented movement to bring production back to states like South Carolina.
Yeah, thanks, Sam. And yeah, just to build on what Sam has said, and by the way, bit of housekeeping, we've got a chat. So if you have questions, please do not hesitate to drop those in the chat, and we'll certainly make every effort to answer those during the course of this conversation. But this gives you a little bit of historical context. Before the 1970s, most pharma companies manufactured here in the U.S. for any number of reasons. Then in the 70s and 80s, things moved offshore, primarily to Europe and Puerto Rico, and that was really tax incentive driven, cost of doing business driven. Those two areas really put a lot of emphasis on that during that time period. Then in the 90s, production really moved to India and China for reasons you might imagine: cheap labor, environmental restrictions are not what they are in much of the rest of the world. And then a lot of the raw materials, for example, are in China, and that trend has really been only growing, and I would even use the word exacerbating since the 1990s. And as of August of 2019, and this was from a study from Grant Thornton, 72% of manufacturing facilities that make APIs were located overseas, and 13% were located in China. Today, 80% of APIs come from either India or China, and 97% of all antibiotics are produced overseas. So whether it's 95%, 80%, 97%, these are all percentages that studies talk about. None of them are particularly good for our purposes, given what we've seen, particularly in the last year or so. And I'm a kind of a graphical person by nature. And so this really shows what the imbalance looks like when it comes to trade, and particularly in pharmaceuticals. And this is as of March of 2020. As you can see, that balance is not what we want it to be, and it continues to move in the opposite direction. Then, of course, and that was the case before 2020. And then COVID-19 shined the world's biggest spotlight on this particular issue for the U.S. Pick a product, but pharmaceuticals were certainly no different. What they found was that companies that produce here or sell here that are producing overseas found that their supply chains that really were just in time in nature, decentralized in nature, they failed and continue to have a high risk of failure. Also, frankly, quality issues have become an issue when it comes to overseas production. That was before the pandemic, and certainly nothing has changed in that regard since the pandemic has started. And Sam touched on this earlier. I think what the other thing it really highlighted was that this became a national security issue for our country. This wasn't just about, hey, can I get some, get a Z-Pack when I need it. This became a national security issue, and it's one that, as we'll hear, governmental entities and I think the private sector are pushing hard to try and rectify this issue for our country. So now let's talk. So that's kind of where we are, our challenges. Let's talk about what I would call an opportunity, but certainly I would even call it a necessity. So Site Selectors Guild, some of you may be familiar with this group. It is one of the preeminent group of site selection consultants in the country. And when they talk, people listen. And they recently have predicted an uptick in onshoring to North America primarily, and then largely due to COVID-19. But one of the industries in which they see that happening is in pharma and life sciences. So the experts that are working with companies all over the world are telling us, hey, let's get ready. Let's get ready for this. Let's set the conditions in the way that we want them to be set so we can be successful. Onshoring is a term we hear a lot about. It's pretty simple. It's what you would think it is, right? I mean, it's sourcing or moving back a production to a factory within national borders. So the advantages that brings I think are pretty obvious: lead times, quality, accessibility, minimization of import taxation, those sort of international, transatlantic and other issues that come up are not going to be there. Preserving quality. Again, we've seen a lot of poor quality from products coming out in this space from other parts of the world, especially China and India. We've got two targets, okay? Primarily, we've got American companies that are producing overseas, especially in China and India. And then we've got foreign companies that want to serve the North American market. So those are kind of the two. There are others, but those are the two big targets in this space. And I will just make a note. It's sad to see all of my family, except for my parents and my brother, and are overseas in India, and so they are really combating an issue right now with COVID-19. From a human perspective, it's tragic, but certainly when you're talking about how much our country relies on India when it comes to this space, it becomes even more of just a brutal reality for the U.S., putting aside the human element. So it's something that we need to keep an eye on, but we need to diversify if we can. So, if onshoring was easy, it would have been done years ago, right? There are some hurdles to it. It's a multi-year process to set up a new facility, right? I mean, you've got to deal with your customers, you've got to find a site, you've got to work through, the regulatory hoops that can come into particularly FDA certification. There's some taxation issues, labor regulations about wages. And then, the big buyers in the U.S., frankly, are constantly, dropping prices, and that really, squeezes the margins, any margins that companies could have. But some of these are tipping into the favor of actually bringing that production stateside again, and we're doing that anyway. But COVID-19, again, your margins are worthless if you don't have a product to sell. And that's the key, is being able to produce stateside so that we can actually have the products that whether it's this market or other markets are consuming. So these are just some basic site selection factors that these consultants look at, companies look at. I often work with site selection consultants, tax professionals, in-house company representatives, and these are the things that they're asking about. And this isn't necessarily specific to life sciences, pharma. But how close are they to their market and suppliers? What's the labor pool look like? Infrastructure, utilities. How quickly can I get my facility operating? What am I going to have to pay in taxes? Do you have a site or a building available for me? Quality of life is continuing to be a factor. It's maybe not the leading factor, but it is one, and it's one, frankly, where South Carolina stacks up well, amongst others. And then, of course, how do the state and local governments work together to try and assist business growth once a business is located in a particular area of our state? Now, the site selection factors for life science companies are a little bit different, and it depends on the stage. So, and this is particularly in the pharma space, which I think is a large target for onshoring projects potentially. At the R&D stage, it's more about venture capital, access to funding. R&D stage clusters, location, is there a research pool? Then at the clinical trial stage, it's about, do you have the research facilities? Do you have a trial population? Is there enough talent there to assist in that particular stage of product development? And then with manufacturing and distribution, which is again what we're really trying to focus on, that stage, it's what the things I mentioned earlier. Do you have the labor force? What does your power structure look like? What does your water structure look like? Logistics, highway internet systems, interstate systems, I should say, airports, operating costs, tax minimization. These are all things that we need to be thinking about for all companies, but life science companies are no different in that regard. So Sam mentioned this earlier. There are a number of incentives and other programs that have been developed by the federal government. And one I guess refreshing thing that we've seen is that whether it was under President Trump's administration or now under President Biden's administration, there's a focus on onshoring, and there's a focus on trying to bring particularly onshoring of life science and pharmaceuticals back to the U.S. And so there's some incentives that have been put on the table by the federal government, as well as some pretty interesting programs, financing, funding, and contracting opportunities that have been available, again, to try and drive this kind of onshore recruitment and offset some of those cost factors I mentioned earlier that make it challenging for companies to move production back to the U.S. So, and Sam, feel free to jump in with any of these. I know you're talking to companies certainly that are asking questions about these programs. Opportunity zones, that is a program that's been around for a few years. It was a bill introduced by Senator Scott from South Carolina. It is aimed at basically bolstering development in low-income areas. Each state across the country's governor has the ability to designate opportunity zones. We have 135 of those in South Carolina. And we're really, the way the incentive works is it's a short-term, it's a capital gains play. it's a capital gains incentive. So, for capital gains taxes, normally, if it's short-term capital gain, meaning that you've held the asset for less than a year before you've sold it, a company sold it, then it's a 37% tax rate, income tax rate on those gains. If the company's held that asset before selling it for more than a year, then it can be up to 20%. But in any event, it's a pretty significant tax hit. And so what this program does is it allows an investor who has realized capital gains, or maybe unrealized would be the right word, but it could realize capital gains, and allow them to invest in these opportunity zone funds in these particularly low income communities to try and bolster development. And this is a great graphic actually from the City of Columbia's webpage that kind of talks about the benefit to investors. So, it can be a tax deferral, or if that investment actually stays in the project for more than 10 years, then there's a 100% tax exemption. So there's a bit of a sliding scale based on how long the investment stays in the project. This is a great map from the South Carolina Power Team's website, which is a font of information if you haven't visited it. But this shows the designated opportunity zones in South Carolina that we have. And Sam, after I make these remarks, I'd love for you to jump in. Opportunity zones aren't the end all and be all for onshoring. Okay, they're a tool. They could be part of a capital stack that allows for a company to locate here. The key for an opportunity zone, the use of an opportunity zone incentive is that the company that's making the investment has to have capital gains, right? And so a lot of foreign companies might not actually have capital gains because they're not selling an asset in the U.S. and don't have assets in the U.S. But there are some scenarios that work. So, for example, U.S. company that's been producing overseas now wants to come home and produce. Perhaps they have assets that they're selling and want to move back. Another foreign investors that maybe don't have a facility here yet, but maybe have some other investments in the U.S. that trigger capital gains. There might be an opportunity for them as well. Developers, there's developers that might want to work in developing a particular life sciences cluster, or some products that might be buildings, for example, that might be helpful based on their location and their infrastructure capabilities for this particular industry. That's an opportunity there, no pun intended. And then, what we've also seen is that, foreign investors, even if they don't have the capital gains to be able to take advantage of this, they're watching this program because they know that they want to be near where the growth is. They want to be near where investment will be located. And so this is a particular area where we're seeing some activity. Sam, I know you're talking to companies. We've got, for example, Nephron Pharmaceuticals, fantastic client of both of ours. They certainly have utilized the Opportunity Zone program for their expansion in Lexington County. But what have you been hearing?
Yeah, it's and first off, I think you're rolling through this very clearly. It's probably the best outline I've seen of the relevant issues. So I didn't even want to break your stride on that. It's hugely relevant though, Tushar, and whether that's even a marketing perception to some extent. There are a lot of financiers that are responsible for creating capital stacks for some of the onshoring projects and some of the major pharma infrastructure heavy projects that are seriously evaluating states like South Carolina. And we've actually had some cases where the principal we're dealing with requires an opportunity zone to be, to even look at a site. And you're about to talk about new market tax credits. We actually have one project that it is a requirement that it would be an opportunity zone with a new market tax credit overlay. And then you even have people looking for, is there an abandoned textile facility or other thing that you could add to the stack. So it's very relevant, very attractive. I think some people are just trying to figure out how they can leverage it. You made great points about the foreign-based companies because it is a capital gains incentive. So I'll leave it at that, other than saying we can add a little bit color later. And I've got a screen or two that even shows some of the opportunity zones that are in play right now.
Excellent. Yeah, thanks, Sam. And Sam mentioned, there's another tool. Again, this is an area which you're seeing, there are federal in the economic development world, normally we don't spend that much time focusing on federal related incentives, right? But this is a space where we can and we should be. Whether you're an economic developer that's recruiting, whether you are a company that's prospecting, or anybody else along the spectrum, it's something to be aware of. So, so we talked about opportunity zones. Another program that's been around much longer is the New Market Tax Credit Program. It's been around since, frankly, the early 2000s, and it has led to investment of over $26 billion of investment in over 5,300 projects across the country. I had the pleasure of working on the first Opportunity Zone project, or sorry, New Market Tax Credit project in South Carolina. Was not a farmer project, but this is a great way to push some financing for these kinds of projects, as companies are, again, thinking about combining to create a capital stack that makes it possible to move forward with the project. So the way this program basically works is an investor, which is typically like a lending institution or some subgroup that they've created. They actually are, that entity is actually the group that receives the tax credit. It's not the actual job creator or the operating entity. And it allows them to receive a 39% tax credit against what their investment is in a particular project over a 7-year period. The benefit for a borrower or the actual operator or job creator is that they only have to pay make interest only payments for the first 7 years on the financing, and then there's a bullet maturity. But due to the credits, the interest rate is often 50% of what market rate would otherwise be. So it's cheap money for companies and provides them some really good opportunities. And then the other beauty of it is, normally, because of the tax credits that the lending institution has received, they're willing to actually forgive a significant portion of the debt. So it's a really good program, and it's one that, again, we should be considering more, certainly in South Carolina. Another great map from the Power Team's website, as you can see here. This is a New Market Tax Credit map. There is a multiplier for the benefit for severe distressed areas. And this does a great job of highlighting what the eligible areas and the severe distressed areas are for this program in the state. So now let's talk about some I think what are new sources, certainly not ones that were created years ago. DFC, Development Finance Corporation. So this is a group, again, federal group. It was created back in 2018. It combined a couple of other former agencies, as you see here. And really what it does is, initially the intent was to help bolster investment in projects overseas, so outside of the boundaries of the U.S. And it really was intended to combat some of the stuff that China is doing with their Road and Belt Initiative across the world and increasing their influence. But in May of 2020, President Trump issued an executive order that actually authorized the DFC to invest in projects domestically. So it allows investment in COVID-19 projects. It allows for, for example, PPE, generic drugs, pharmaceuticals. These are all projects that can now, domestic, that can be invested in to bolster onshoring. As you can see here, the DFC and the Department of Defense are jointly administering $100 million to, again, supply chain reshoring from the $2.3 billion COVID-19 legislation that was passed back in March. And again, these are guarantee and/or loan programs for the DSC, and they can range anywhere from $1 million to $1 billion. So the way that the program works is, again, this is just high-level stuff. Obviously it's much more complicated than this. We're just trying to scope these issues for you all, so you know what resources are out there. Project by project determination, the interest rates and maturity, that's going to be determined on a case-by-case basis. Max maturity of 25 years. But what I've heard from clients and what I've seen firsthand is that these rates for projects in this particular space are good. The terms are good, and they're valuable. A couple of examples just to point out. DFC in July of last year, they invested $765 million in a DFC, a Defense Production Act loan to help Eastman Kodak launch Kodak Pharmaceuticals, which was focused on basically creating ingredients needed for generic pharmaceuticals, onshoring here. November 2020, $590 million loan to a company, Apogect Systems, focused on pre-filled injectors for COVID-19 delivery. The big money, big opportunities that's available if you can navigate the system the right way, and frankly know that there's an opportunity out there to be had. Another federal group, BARDA, stands for the Biomedical Advanced Research and Development Authority. It's part of HHS, but it's another group that is helping bolster onshoring in this particular space. One example, May of last year, a $354 million contract awarded to a company called Flowcorp, for shoring up domestic, COVID-19 drug production. March of this year, so in the Biden administration, $105 million investment into Merck to upgrade and equip some of their facilities for vaccine manufacturing. So there are resources out there. Some of these are COVID-19, but it's not just COVID-19 related. Department of Defense. There's a list here. Without going through every single one, you see a list of big money investments and contracts awarded to a number of different companies in a number of different life science and pharmaceutical related spaces. And again, what you see here, which is refreshing, is support in 2020 and now support in 2021, despite the change in administration. So most recently, President Biden issued an executive order. His emphasis is going to be on this as well. So he launched a 100-day review of supply chains for a number of products, but including pharmaceuticals. So that's scheduled to run sometime in June. Chances are there's going to be a lot more to come in this space, so it's something we all should be watching. Then we've got a number of state and local tools. These are things you're probably more aware of. We have in South Carolina a Life Sciences Act that was passed back in 2004. Well-meaning. I think what all of us that have worked in this space have seen is that it's just maybe not as broad as we need it to be. Now, the Department of Commerce does an amazing job, as do our counties, in using the tools that we have to recruit businesses in this space. But it's something that I think part of this conversation is what more can we do? This is not good enough to compete, frankly, against North Carolina, against Tennessee, against Georgia. And we're working on that with all of your help.
And Tushar, I may jump in for a second on this.
Please.
Yeah. It will be a long-term important initiative of SC Bio as the state's life science economic development organization. Rather than framing it under a header of incentives, I like to call it a competitiveness initiative, where we look at best practices in the states that have been most successful in recruiting this industry and where the clusters are deep. Some of it is just low-hanging fruit in terms of our ability to make some adjustments, whether in our tax code or how we approach companies that have to spend millions of dollars on FDA validation and certification before they can actually sell product. As you mentioned, though, we've also learned that we have existing tools, if we're just smart about it, that can come into play. Many of you in economic development know that fee in lieu of taxes is just an extraordinarily important tool to level the playing field between our state and many competitive states, so that our property taxes are not an obstacle. And the fact is, one of the more important issues we've run into is when these larger scale pharmaceutical facilities are building a sophisticated new campus in our state, it often takes up to 2 years to complete these facilities and then get them fully certified, validated, where they're allowed by the FDA to sell product. It's important to mitigate property taxes during that burn rate period for them as much as possible. And other states like North Carolina are well versed in how to do that. Rather than having to create new legislation, the bottom line is every county in the state, if it is interested in those kinds of projects, can negotiate as part of a fee-low agreement that they would defer when the property taxes commence, coincide that more with approved production and selling. So there is a lot to this. We're going to have to take it step by step, and it's going to be a long journey, but our commitment is for South Carolina to be one of the most competitive states in the country at a policy level.
Thanks, Sam. And I'm going to speed up a little bit in the interest of time. Tell us what we're looking at here. We've got a proclamation. We've got some other partnerships that I think SC Bio is working on with the Department of Commerce. Can you quickly talk about that?
Yeah, this is exciting stuff. It really is, because 4 years ago, when I first took the role as CEO of SC Bio, we could have only hoped that our state would show so much deliberate energy and focus on this. And it is one of the silver linings of COVID, where the importance of the industry and all those attributes I talked about earlier have resonated all the way through Governor McMaster. So in addition to general support across the board, I mean, I'm going to tell you, we have great legislative champions in the chairman of Ways and Means, or senators like Thomas Alexander, representatives like Jason Elliott. But at this point in time, Governor McMaster has made it clear that life sciences is a new cornerstone of his administration going forward, sees the enormous potential, started kind of, let's say, formalizing that cornerstone through a proclamation back in February, naming it SC Bio Life Science Week in South Carolina. That was quickly followed by an executive order, which is truly a policy directive issued to SC Bio and the Department of Commerce to collaboratively and with our other economic development partners develop strategies to recruit and cultivate this industry like never before, with specific focus on the pharmaceutical API type projects that you heard Tushar talking about on the onshoring, as well as vital PPE. Think of not just face shields or masks, nitrile gloves, almost all of them are produced in either South Korea or Malaysia. So that would be an element of PPE that would fit very well on this strategy. I literally had a meeting with the governor's team yesterday, along with our interim CEO to be, Aaron Ford, where we are continuing to have discussions on how the executive order can be leveraged further to review all of our current practices, all of our current funding strategies. This is being very blunt. We are so appreciative that Commerce came in a few years ago at $100,000 a year to help support this mission. But the reality is this: we have one of the top pharma states in the United States right above us called North Carolina. Their legislature puts $13.6 million a year into our counterpart economic development organization for life sciences. So to truly be competitive, we've got to up our programming and put more fuel in the tank. This is setting the stage, Tushar, for that to happen.
And so that's kind of a partnership amongst statewide groups. And then I believe SC Bio, and I'm certain of it because I'm working with this group, you are also pushing, and I think anybody that works in economic development, we all know that what makes South Carolina so special and why we punch above our weight, frankly, is that we all work together. And so this is an initiative that I think that SC Bio is pushing at the sort of amongst local officials primarily, right?
That's right. One of our responses to COVID-19, and in our newest edition of our strategic plan, this is really laid out. And that was that we needed to take a more aggressive role in supporting all of our economic development teams in the state with the kind of the knowledge and specialization needed to successfully onshore repatriate, put South Carolina first in line as much as we possibly can, as all 50 states look at how they can do this. So we have developed an ED task force that includes all the regions of the state that are significant investors of SC Bio. There's multiple counties involved, and those teams are all part of the task force, along with our major utilities, all of which are significant investors of SC Bio. And by the way, when Tushar was talking about infrastructure, so power is essential, redundant, reliable power. Water is essential in this industry. So the infrastructure providers and utility providers are very key. We also have collaboration with multiple subject matter experts, whether it's real estate developers and specialized contractors who really understand how to refurbish existing buildings, convert them quickly to life science readiness, or to build from greenfield sites, because there are so many unique issues that you have to consider in advance. So, for a lot of companies that are evaluating onshoring repatriation opportunities to be super competitive, speed to market matters to them. And so we have to really be ready and on our A game to support those efforts. And again, we briefed the governor's team completely on this so that it's all synchronized and integrated in approach.
So yeah, I mean, and a lot of these things we've already covered as we move forward from a state and local onshoring strategy perspective. I mean, I think incentives, legislative. Sam, you mentioned the property tax issue. That's one where I would encourage counties to be proactive. So much of this is about selling what we already have in our toolkit and packaging it in a way that makes it attractive to companies in this space. Perhaps even adopting a proactive policy, to provide a tax exemption before commercialization and FDA approval. We've got a corporate license fee franchise tax issue in South Carolina. A lot of our competitors have completely abolished it. I know SC Bio and Bob Quinn's good work at SCRA are working to try and pass some legislation to maybe alleviate some of the pain, particularly for companies that are pre-commercialization, that are getting dinged pretty significantly that we've heard from. Again, broaden the NAICS codes that are able to get the benefit of the existing laws that we have. And then from a political perspective, raising the profile, something that I think SC Bio has done a great job with, is raising the profile of this in South Carolina. Not only South Carolina's role in the life sciences space, but what our role could be to decision makers in DC. I know Sam, SC Bio, has done a lot of lobbying in that space. And then you've mentioned, Sam, about General Assembly funding. I think, again, North Carolina has, what was the number, Sam?
13.6 million.
Right. That the General Assembly funds to the NC Bio, the competing, we'll call it the competing organization.
That's right. The Center for Biotechnology, which is kind of the economic development arm purely for life sciences.
Right. So, Sam, you want to quickly work us through some of these things from talking to your companies that are interested, that are important to them, I guess, and things we should be thinking about?
Yeah, again, it's such a complex, wide-reaching industry. Companies, there are incredibly promising companies, even at early stage, that are still having to raise capital, but have very novel technologies that can be disruptive. And gratefully, we're working with a lot of mature corporations. One of the exciting things, Tushar, that we've talked about is South Carolina prides itself in being one of the most productive places on the planet. We are very good at advanced manufacturing, and the U.S. economy, as it was veering more and more service oriented. What's interesting about onshoring and these opportunities is it needs production capabilities back in the United States. It's really going to be celebrating advanced manufacturing capabilities along with innovation. States like California, Massachusetts are simply not well positioned for those kinds of investments. South Carolina is. We're hungry, and we know how to work shoulder to shoulder with industry and be creative. So I think we're going to compete very, very, very well. But it is important that we're extremely deliberate. All these categories that you're mentioning are going to matter as we go forward. Capital attraction is a big deal with this industry. So we are working like crazy with federal agencies. As you said, Tushar, I had never in my almost 25 years of economic development worked hand in glove with federal agencies the way we are right now to support economic development projects in South Carolina. But again, these compelling loan instruments through the DFC that you talked about, DOD willing to make purchase order commitments on a preliminary basis for vital products and services, BARDA and HHS willing to help fund some of the science required to help expedite approval of some of these technologies. So we are literally in conversation with federal agencies while working on our own state strategies around it. I do think this mentions talent, and you can't understate it enough, and we're running out of time. But what I would say is, if we're going to have unprecedented efforts to bring this industry into South Carolina like never before, we got to make sure we're prepared to deliver when they get here. So imagine in an industry like life sciences and pharma and med tech, where we don't yet have certificate programs across the board in our tech system the way we do automotive and aerospace. The good news is we know how to do it. We've done it for other industries, but we have to step up our game and be at least equally tailored in our approach to this industry. And I think the next screen may give tell you what, if you don't mind. Well, I'll tell you what I'm going to talk about is international landing pad in a minute. They're just unique things that this industry needs, in addition to what you're seeing here, venture,
right?
In addition to infrastructure.
So we've got the capital attraction, workforce is critical. You're hearing a lot about, sites, buildings, infrastructure, power and water, I think are huge issues, right, for companies, particularly in the pharmaceutical space. But then, just generally, there needs to be an ecosystem, right? And that's one of the things that SC Bio has really been working together with Department of Commerce and so many of the other groups that work in this space to try and build. And so if you'll finish us off kind of with a sampling, I guess, of some of the things that we have in South Carolina, that check some of these boxes and what we may have coming as well.
Absolutely. We've got a couple of visuals here just to kind of give you an idea. So some of the projects we are looking at, and let's say gratefully, we are talking about some mammoth investment opportunities, huge automated facilities, but still with amazing job creation. And on sites like the Saxagatha Industrial Park, you're looking at an aerial of Nephron, which is in the process of completing an additional 350,000 square feet in 2 different facilities that will bring them closer to 1 million square feet on the ground. And that's designed for COVID vaccine filling and also for new med tech applications. You see in the top left, Camp Hall. Just and there's many examples like this. Pine Hill in Dorchester County, Camp Hall in Berkeley County. These are massive opportunity zones that have all the infrastructure needed to support the kind of industry we're talking about at a large level. But we also need, there are smaller, innovative companies that need to be near talent, need to be able to tap into the power of research universities, get shoulder to shoulder with clinical champions who can help them innovate further. So really some of what I'll call the urban side of sites and destinations for the industry are very important, from West Edge in Charleston on the peninsula to the Prisma Memorial Campus in Greenville and Innovista in Columbia. And then I think you can't underestimate how important our relationship with healthcare is. I think one of the success factors, if I can humbly say, for SC Bio has been a lot of bio organizations kind of work over here and the healthcare folks are over here, and they don't collaborate enough. We're insistent on a body contact sport where if you put clinical champions with their perspectives in the room with industry and academic researchers, crazy good things happen. So all of those organizations you see noted there are our board of directors or investors, and we, having the South Carolina Hospital Association as a shoulder-to-shoulder collaborator with SC Bio ensures we keep our eye on the ball. And the companies, especially in a state that's #1 in foreign direct investment, every single one of them has to find their way into our healthcare providers systems and is depending on us to develop strategies on how they can be how they can develop their value proposition so they have a chance to have that technology adopted, or it's just not going to happen here. And then I think we got this screen might be the most important one I would share, in that one of our competitive advantages, Tushar, and you're great at this, and you help recruit all over the world with commerce and organizations like SC Bio, leveraging the fact that we're #1 in foreign direct investment. And what I can say about life sciences that is really compelling for South Carolina, any life science company in the world that has game, that is good at what they do, if they're not in the United States, they want to be in the United States, because we are the largest market in the world, and FDA approval in the United States is the gold standard. So it's not shooting fish in a barrel. We have a lot of competition, and they're used to the usual suspects, I will call it. They're thinking we got to look at Boston, Philadelphia. If they're even looking at the South, Research Triangle Park, North Carolina, maybe Atlanta, and then they're quickly jumping over to the West Coast or Medical Alley in Minneapolis around Mayo, those kind of places. We're having to create the name for ourselves and demonstrate we have all the ingredients for success. But as Tushar very accurately pointed out, as a unique economic development organization, we have to be focused on building the ecosystem as much as recruitment. And that's a big part of our job. When these international landing parties come, if you don't mind flipping back to that one.
Sure.
Forgive me. What you see at the bottom is we're very seamless with our economic development partners. We're not managing projects. We are high-powered project support is what I would say. So it's how do you get these companies introduced to the people who can help navigate FDA strategies, reimbursement strategies with private payers, CMS, clinical trial support, capital attraction, and then again, actually other industry partners who can be great suppliers, collaborators, even JV partners in the state. And they really need to get in front of surgeons and top clinicians that are interested in their technology. So this is where SC Bio spends a lot of its time complementing the economic development might of our state, regional, and county organizations. And we always tap into guys like Tushar.
And that's what makes this area so, I think, unique and interesting as we wrap up today is, it's an intersection, right? It's an intersection of economic development, of healthcare, of academia, and companies. To be successful in this space, or to be more successful in this space, it's going to require a partnership amongst all of these different stakeholders to row in the same direction, which we've been very good at doing in South Carolina for years, in so many different arenas. And this is certainly no different. I think in order to land some of these onshoring opportunities, maybe we need more rowers and a bigger boat. And I think, your annual, the SC Bio annual meeting is a fantastic event. We did it virtually recently, earlier this year. When you're talking about building an ecosystem, they're saying maybe there's no better single event in the state that encompasses that ecosystem than this annual meeting that's held, that's pushed forward by SC Bio.
Right. No, I appreciate it. And you see the tagline from the recent one, the power of us. So you segued beautifully to that is a mantra that is going to help us win. It's something South Carolina does better than most other states. Kind of our tribal sort of mentality. It works very, very well. So yeah, we're excited about all the possibilities. You see here, actually, we are planning to bring everybody back together in person, hopefully next February 22nd through 24th in Charleston. We had over 700 participants in our virtual conference back in February, which was kind of astonishing, from 9 different countries. So, it takes a village, and we're having a lot of fun with this. And I want to thank you, Tushar, for having me today, and for really all the value and leadership that you're providing to the mission.
Well, and Sam, thanks for participating, and sorry for going long, everybody. I don't think anybody's ever accused Sam and I individually of being short on words, and you put us together, and this is the natural result of that phenomenon. So, I don't see any questions in the chat. You all know how to reach us. Please, let's all work together to try and work in this space. Our firm, is really, really trying to push forward initiatives in the life science space. We've got a couple of upcoming webinars. One is, again, life science pharmaceuticals driven, and a really interesting one coming up next month. That's going to involve 2 of my law partners and close friends, Nicole Murgo and Jenny Claverius. And then our board chair at SC Bio and a great friend and client of mine, Lou Kennedy, on a fantastic and very, I think, groundbreaking decision that was held, that was passed down by the courts recently, very recently, in the space of trade secrets. Really, really groundbreaking kind of stuff, and stuff that I think companies should certainly be in the loop on as we move forward. And then we'll have others coming, another one coming up in June. If you have topics of interest, let us know. We're here more to be a sounding board for everybody and trying to really push conversation. And then particularly in this space, last but not least, Sam, point of personal privilege as we end. We know you mentioned it. You already spilled the beans. Vicor Scientific, for those who didn't know it, early, you'll be leaving SC Bio and all of us there, but you will be staying in our world, in our space, in our state, at Vicor. You want to say one or a couple points about your upcoming professional endeavors?
Sure thing. No, thanks for even bringing that up. I know we're a little bit over, so leave it to be said. Vicor is a company that I guess I've had the privilege of working with no idea that I would actually go to work and join forces with them directly. But over the last 3 years, I'm gonna give them one blatant plug where I just say, they actually put $100,000 a year into SC Bio right now. That's how much they believed in the mission as they were building the company up. And it was cool to watch the two co-founders do a startup in South Carolina. It's kind of a poster child, and literally we're in temporary facilities that SCRA provided in Charleston. They quickly exploded within 3 years to over 200 million in revenue, almost 500 employees, major investments in Philadelphia, Charleston. They acquired a large pathology lab recently in Tampa, Florida. They have partnered and become a lead investor with a Berlin and California-based company that is cutting edge in liquid biopsy early cancer detection tests. And the list goes on. They have a lot on their plate, and they're about to launch a significant new entity in what I'll call the healthcare innovation space next week. The announcement will come out on May 4th. I will be serving on the board of directors for Vicor across the board to continue helping with overall strategies with all the portfolio companies, but I will be president and CEO of the new company that'll be named next week. And so pretty exciting. I look forward to sharing my new contact information, and we absolutely plan to continue not only Vicor, but the new company that I'll be leading will be a board member of SC Bio because we believe so much in this mission. So thanks, Tushar.
Congrats, Sam, on that. And I always, so many of us in this space say, listen, for real progress to be made, it takes a partnership between the public sector and the private sector. And I think SC Bio is a perfect example of that, given who the investors are. We'll certainly look forward to working with you as you move forward in this new capacity. And your contact information that's on the screen here is good for what, maybe another 2 or 3 days.
The cell phone should last forever. But
okay,
there will be a new email address soon. Thanks.
And I'm sure, and I'm sure we will all get that out to those that need it. And again, Aaron Ford's going to do a fantastic job jumping in at the interim role effective May 1, and certainly look forward to her working with her in my role as vice chair as we continue SC Bio's work. So thanks again, everybody. Sorry for running long. Hopefully we didn't eat too much into your lunch hour. Have a great day. Be healthy, be safe, and we look forward to our next conversation.
Thank you.
Thanks.